Let's make sure we recorded this one.
Uh-oh.
Hey, I recorded the second one.
I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
You did record the second one?
I did.
Where's that?
It's
No.
already up. It's published. It published yesterday.
The second one.
Oh, the third
That's what
one.
he means. He means the second one.
This was a discussion we had in the last one, so I don't know that we need to have this discussion again. I'm just saying. I didn't want to bring it up the first time. Hey, welcome to Lunchtime Live, episode 3. As always, we got Pastor Bill and Pastor Mark and myself, Kelly Mosley. And we have another special guest today for the third episode. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep, my name is Carol Bird. I am the new Director of Operations here at St. Paul's. Started a whole week and a half ago. So right away, we get roped into doing things like podcasts. So it's really interesting.
Just get thrown in.
Get thrown in, but I'm really glad to be here and be part of the conversation this morning.
Nice.
That's the ODA clause in action. Other duties as assigned.
Is that what it is?
Other duties
darn.
as assigned. I like it. Okay. Well, Pastor Bill, since you've kind of trended this already, why don't you tell us what we're talking about today?
First of all, I just want to state we are in different chairs. I don't know if you as the listener can hear it, but Mark has moved to my chair. I've moved to Rob's chair, not for any reason other than it was the chair that was left. And then Carol
Morgan messed it up last week too, though, because she was in Rob's chair.
She did. Hey, so today I wanted to talk about the concept of vocation. Vocation is the idea that God has placed each and every one of us in a calling. He's given us a calling to share his word, to bring glory to his name, and to tell other people about him. This all started back at, Matthew 28, right? Great Commission.
Yeah,
It was
I
great.
get where you're going.
It was great. And he said, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you." And we recognize that this commission is not over until the day that Jesus returns. And he has given that all of that responsibility, all of that authority to the church. And so it's not just pastors that have that responsibility. It is everybody.
Yeah.
And so today I just kind of want to hear a little bit about what vocation is, and Carol, just hearing your story of how God has used you to bring glory and fame to his name. Hearing that story, I was like, the listeners have to hear this story. And so did you want to add anything to the vocation talk, Mark, or...
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I would put is, this is the idea of vocation is we don't have just one vocation either, though, right? We have multiple callings from God. So like one of those is, if you are a parent, right? That is one of your callings, and that being a son or a daughter is a calling from God. And it's in those everyday things, right? Doing those everyday things where we love others well and live those out in a God-honoring way that is just as holy of a way of living as being a pastor, right? That's not like a holier calling all of a sudden. And this is, with Luther, comes out of that idea of, being a priest or a monk, that's the real holy way to live, and that's the most honoring thing to God. No, like all of it, right? And so no matter what we're in all our areas of life, where God has us, whether we're a business person, in our homes, all of those are opportunities to live in a way that honors God. And when we're doing that, we're living in those callings.
Yeah, so, Carol, you are now the DO of St. Paul's, the Director of Operations. And so how did, is that something that you just woke up one morning and you're like, you know what? I want to be a DO. How did you decide?
First, before we go any farther, who calls it a do?
Well, I think
Bill
we just started.
coined the phrase.
I'm filling out the copyright paperwork now, so please don't start using it until after I finish it.
Continue. I'm sorry. I was curious.
So we'll kind of go way back, because I think in every story you have to kind of know where you started off, right? Because then you have that comparison as to where you ended up. And so if I go way back, I grew up in England, Church of England, went to church at Christmas and Easter because that's what we were expected to do. Really didn't have a lot of faith in our home, and I will make that distinction. For me, over the years, I've realized there's religion and faith, and so I was religious because I went to a church, and I was Church of England, and I believed there was a God, but I didn't really know who God was, right? I didn't have a relationship with God. We didn't pray at home, but I knew there was a God. And I believed in that enough and went to church. And so grew up through my whole life that way, and then went to work to become an international sales and marketing person, which I really enjoyed, traveled all over the world, thought that I had everything together, thought I knew where everything was going. This was going to be my career. And then I met my husband, who came from Milwaukee, and he was a Lutheran. And so I moved over here and started working here a little bit. And he was very insistent. What was super important to him was that I belonged to the same church as him. He always wanted to go as a family. And so I joined because my husband said so, right? And went to church every Sunday and thought this was great and this was different. And kept having questions about, is this all there is? Like, we just come to church on a Sunday and we just kind of live how we want to and stuff. And so it was kind of searching for something a little more. And then we had kids, and I decided I couldn't travel anymore, 3 weeks out of 4 all over the world, and so stayed at home. And our church happened to have a school, and the enrollment was really kind of low, and so they wanted to start a before and after school program, and they had put this in the bulletin. And one Sunday my husband said to me, "You should do that." I'm like, "I don't know anything about running childcare." "No, but you're a business person. You know how to build businesses. You know how to market them. I think you should do this." And stubborn me then decided I was not going to listen at all. So it took 3 weeks for God to get through to me that this is what he wanted me to do. And it came about in a church service, and I've actually bought the words of the song that really changed my life, actually. And it's the "Here I Am, Lord." And the words, I'll read them through if you don't mind. "I, the Lord of sea and sky, I have heard my people cry. All who dwell in dark and sin, my hand will save. I who made the stars and night, I will make their darkness bright. Who will bear my light to them? Whom shall I send?" And this is the bit that got me. "Here I am, Lord. Is it I, Lord? I have heard your calling in the night. I will go, Lord. If you lead me, I will hold your people in my heart." And then there's a couple of verses. "And I sat in the back of church at the end of the first chorus, crying my eyes out. And my husband said, "What is wrong with you?" And I'm like, "Well, I know what I have to do now." And so I applied for the job. I worked at that church for 17 years. I moved from running the child care to being their business manager, helped build a church with Pastor Rob. That's where I know Pastor Rob from. We expanded the school to capacity. I mean, it was just unbelievable, the work that we were called to do. And I look back, and I'd encourage people, if you look back at your life and really spend some time, I see the hand of God in everything that has kind of happened to me, and using my experiences and plugging me in at times in places where I was really needed the most. And so I've been working within a church environment for 23, 24 years now, and it truly is what God has called me to do, and I believe that wholeheartedly,
I just love that story because it shows how big our God is and how he can work through things in the past that we don't see, we don't look at, we don't notice until we're looking back from the future, right? And as we talk to and as we are the church together, as we continue to work with our congregation and with our church, like, what would you say to people who are kind of in the same boat as you were? Is this all there is? And is it going to church on Sundays? What would you kind of say to them?
So one of the things, and I don't want to come across as if I'm all-knowing or all-wise, because this is a lifelong process. And I learn every day. I learn every week. I tend to think that I've conquered that hill and, I'm doing really great. And then I realize that I still have so much to learn. And what I will say, there are two things that have really kind of come across to me is I'm a very go do it person, right? You've got a problem, tell me what the problem is, I'll go fix it for you. And what I've learned is that I have to be able to be still, right? I have to be still and know that you are God, right? There's a song that I like to listen to from a Christian artist that it says, I have to take time to realize that you are God and I am not. And so I think just always taking the time to evaluate things and talk to God. So I pray to God about a lot of things. I go through the daily things that I have to do, but when there are things that I'm uncertain of, I try to be still and I try to have a conversation with God. But what I have also realized is we're really good at praying and asking for stuff. So we get into prayer, thank you for, can I have, all those kinds of things. What we don't always do as well is take some time to listen, right? And I have gotten to try and train myself to pray and then stop, because quite often that's when I hear God give me the answer, right? If I'm just moving on to the next thing, I sometimes don't leave space to hear what it is that he's trying to tell me. It's time. It really is taking that time, even when you're super busy, because without that conversation, I'm leaning on myself. I'm not leaning on him to help me direct myself as to what I should be doing in certain situations.
I would just invite the listener, as you are listening, maybe you're watching it or listening to it on Facebook, or if you could just leave a comment. Kind of, have you had an experience like this too, where you've been living into this this passion that God has given you, this vocation, this calling that God has given to you? Has there been a time where it has been, man, you just feel like, man, this is what God has called me to do? Because there are times, though, in your vocations where it doesn't always feel like that, too, right? I'm not going to say that there's ever a time in youth ministry that it's not fun, because, youth ministry is fun. But there may also be times where it's tough to do. It's tough to do.
Yeah, no, I think for me, I was just, when you were talking through some of that stuff on the stopping and listening, like, it's a big thing. I mean, I think even when we're talking vocation, that's been something that has happened for me in the last two jobs that I've been in. Both times, if I would have got out of my own way of just saying, no, God, this is what I want. Like, I don't really care whatever you want to say right now. Like, this is what I want. It would have been a lot sooner probably that these things would have happened the way that he had planned. And I think just listening to what he says and taking that extra moment of going, okay, not my will, but yours. And just listening to what he has to say. There's so many things that he can do in each of our lives, obviously, but definitely I've seen it, like you said, in my past, of just taking those moments of trust and those moments of just giving it to him and saying, you know what, I know I'm a dumb human. You are God. And whenever you put the things in order that are supposed to be in order, and I follow that line, how much smoother and better my life tends to go than when I'm trying to make that path on my own, kind of thing.
I'm going to say one of the most difficult things to do is to use that word that you said, trust, right? I think that has been probably one of the hardest things for me to learn, because you see situations and you think that, I know best how to do this. And actually being able to turn your life over to God, to be a Christian in every sense of the word every day, is all about trust. It's all about trust. It's all about saying, I have days where obviously in every job and every situation and people that you run across and you get frustrated. I mean, this doesn't mean that you're angelic, right? It just means that when you have struggles or you have troubles, you turn to a different source for your help in understanding and moving on. And, I think just being able to have your day of, this is frustrating, I'm going to be very unchristian today, and I'm just not going to be very nice about this, and then spending the time to reflect and go, okay, but as a Christian, I'm holding myself to a different standard. I'm holding myself to different expectations, and I can't carry this weight. I can't carry this burden on my own. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Lord. I'm going to pray to you. I'm going to say to you, here is the situation. I don't know how to handle this. So provide me with patience, provide me with strength. Somewhere along the line in your time, this is going to get resolved. And I'm not going to fret about it. I'm not going to spend my days being angry or depressed or, I'm going to get on with the other tasks that you have given me in life. And I'm going to literally put this back in your hands. And that's taken me many, 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 many years to get to that point. But I'm going to tell you, when you can get to that point, it is so freeing, because you no longer are held back just by, these negative things that are going on in your life. You can truly experience, Pastor Bill's favorite thing, you can experience joy, because you can hand off those things that would normally just eat you up. And that is all about trusting that God has got this. He'll figure it out in his time. And I'm going to say, looking back over the years, he has always used bad situations to teach me something I needed to know. I look back and I think, why did I have to go through that experience? Oh, I get why I needed to learn that skill, or why I needed to go through that experience, because it taught me something about myself, taught me something about others, it taught me about my relationship with God. So, bad things sometimes are there to teach us.
It makes me think of Romans 12, the offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable, and just this trust piece that God doesn't, he's not just asking for you to trust him on that 1 hour a week that you're at church. Hey, give me this 1 hour a week, and I promise I'll do something with it. And he does. He does do something in that hour. Sometimes if Pastor Mark's preaching, hour and a half. But I'm just kidding. God does something there, right? He speaks to us through his word and through his sacraments and through his baptism. God does something there. But he's also saying, listen, don't just trust me in that 1 hour. Trust me with their whole life, and the times. Trust me in that 10 minutes car ride when you're taking the kids to school. Trust me in that hour-long meeting at work, that, you got to get through, right? Trust me that I'm going to do something in there. And he's just inviting us into this deeper level of trust that isn't just a short amount of time, but a whole lifestyle.
Listen, service was done by an hour and 15 minutes this last weekend.
And that wasn't all just you, too.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. So, thought that came to my mind here in this is, and I'm just going to put this out to everybody here. So, as they listen to this and they hear of our callings, it can seem, and this goes back to what I first talked about of Luther's view of calling, right? All of us have found a calling, one of our callings from God, in working with churches, right? But that is not the only holy callings out there, right? And I just want to make that clear for those who are listening here. If you are in a place right now that is not working in church work, that's okay. And that can be a holy calling from God. And so I guess to put that out there to everybody, so how do they then live in those just secular places, right? How do we, there's a way you can live in that in which we're not living out then that holy calling that God has for us. So what is the way in which we live in that differently that lives into that calling that God has for us in, whatever place he has us?
So I'm going to say, because I've worked in both environments, and I think that what really is critical is how you present yourself and how you interact with people, because I was not always a person of such deep faith, and I know that people will, talk about Christians as being hypocritical because they say one thing and they act another way. And I'm going to say that the biggest thing that people can do, regardless of where they work, your vocation is to be a Christian and to exemplify that in all your interactions wherever you are. So whether you're in a corporate setting at an office because that's where God thinks that your path is, you're there because you're going to set an example. And you're going to show people why your life is different, right? So not everybody can or should work in a church environment, but that doesn't mean as a Christian you don't have a vocation to live out that life and express it and model the behaviors that, you know, we really believe are Christ-like, you know, Christ-pleasing. So I think that's the role for people that are working in a secular world, but that are Christians and proclaim that they are following Jesus.
Well, I was thinking too, like, I mean, for me, I'm like, because just like Carol said, like, I've been in both worlds and I've seen several different types of churches. I've seen several different types of secular jobs. I've seen a lot of different things. And I think for me, there's not a difference. At least there shouldn't be. Like, I feel like when you don't work in a church or work in a ministry type thing, you tend to look at those that do work in those ministry jobs that they're like, oh, well, they are better. Like they know how to live that life that way all the time, 100%. Sure, it can appear that way. And I think that when you are working in a church, you get that feeling sometimes that it's like, okay, I'm supposed to act right, so I'm going to act right. Whereas when you're in a secular job, yeah, they're not looking for you to act the way that you would expect them to. But as Christians, we're called to do that. Like, it's not because I'm in a church that I'm acting the way that I am. I'm acting this way because Christ has called me to act that way, you know? Like, and I'm thinking even with secular jobs, I've had friends that have said the same thing of like, well, it's easier for you to do that or not. And it's like, but it shouldn't be, because it should be easier for you to make a difference in somebody's life because you're around people that have no church. You're around people that have no tie to Jesus at all every day. Whereas for me, I'm not always around people that have no tie to Jesus, have no tie to church, because I'm in the church. I'm working in the church. So they're already coming here. So it's to go out. I mean, you're on mission every day when you're working a secular job. And there's so many people out there that all it takes is for you to, like I said, act right. Not even that you have to preach the gospel to them, that you have to do anything else. You just got to act the way Christ would. And I think that's the thing that I'm like, I don't think that there is a difference in how you should live your life in the mission or ministry field compared to a secular field.
Well, and I think we're thinking about this just in terms of jobs too. I mean, we've all been given secular, the vocation of neighbor. You know, we're not just planted like in a random field where there's nobody around us, right? I mean, we live in communities and in neighborhoods. We live next to people, and God has placed us in those spaces so that we can share his love to the people around us. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to go like knock on the doors of all your neighbors and say, hey, are you coming to church with me this weekend? You know, it could mean that, but it could also just be, hey, I'm praying for you. Let me know if you need anything. And bringing over a plate of cookies every once in a while. Which, you know, if you're in my neighborhood, my door's always open. But it's not just neighbors either, right? It's also as parents. It's where you live. It's where you work. It's where you play. So it could be these, they're called, what's the term for it? Like the places that you go and when you're not working or you're not living, it's playing. Yeah, your play spaces, you know?
Hangouts.
Yeah, your hangouts. Playground. Yeah, your adult playgrounds. You know, whether it's you're going to the gym, God's placed you in that gym in order to bless the people around you. If you're going to the brewery, right? God's placed you in that brewery to be a blessing to the people around you. And so there's ways that you can do that. you just living the love of Jesus to people.
So, in that vein of vocation, one thing I'm thinking about too is how do we? I think sometimes a barrier too is comparison when it comes to the unique ways that God has gifted us, because that relates a lot of times to vocation. Some vocation, right? We're just like parent. If I have a kid, I'm given that. Whether I didn't get an interview to see if my skills were right for that or not. God has said, yes, you have the skills, right? You're going to learn them, right? You're going to figure this out. But I think there are unique gifts that God has given us. And as we think about how do we maximize using those and being comfortable with that of who God created us to be and not seeking to be like, I got to be like Tom over there because he's just so awesome. He has these gifts and I wish I had those gifts. And so if I just work harder at those things, well, maybe I can be like, but instead of just being content with like, no, these are the gifts God has given me. How do I maximize those? How do I use those as blessings then in these different places where God has me?
I think that goes back to, listening, right? Listening, because God made every single one of us and he made us for a purpose. And he didn't make us like little cookie cutter Christians that are all the same. He has a grand plan where each one of us fits in. And so if we listen to what he is wanting us to do in whatever scenario it is, whether it's in a secular job, whether it's at a church, whether it's volunteering as a parent, as a neighbor, he already has that plan laid out for us. We just sometimes get in our own way. I mean, I always like to go back to, there's a book by Jeff Mannion called The Land Between, and he talks about the Israelites in the desert, right? And that, God frees them from slavery. You'd think they'd be happy, but no, they, whined and whined and whined and whined, right? And so he gave them what they wanted, and then they, would find something else to whine about. And I read that book and thought, man, humanity has not changed a jot because we are just the same, right? God gives us all these things. He gives us these gifts. We're not satisfied, and so we whine and want more. And I think, if we would just take some time to really take a look at who we are and who God has created us to be and be happy with that, be content with who I am, because I'm a small part of a large creation that he has, but he's created me for a purpose. He's got a plan for me. And so it goes back to, trusting and listening and being content with, this is my role. I don't need to be compared to Joe or Jane or anybody because God has created me for this purpose. So I don't have to strive to be somebody else because he created me to be this, right? I'm being happy and content in that. That doesn't mean that we don't try to be better, right? That's an everyday thing. We try to be better. It doesn't mean that we don't fail, because we do. Thank goodness we have forgiveness, right? And grace and all those things. But it does take some, again, praying and trying to listen for his voice, his direction. And sometimes that comes from us hearing. Sometimes it comes from the people that he places in our lives, right? And listening to them and their perception of us and their understanding and their guidance. And that's where I'll say, I've had mentors like Pastor Rob, and I've had a lot of pastor friends that have just helped me on this path endlessly, because they can see from the outside things that I can't see, right? And they can connect those things with what God is asking. Without them to guide me, I don't know that I would have gotten to this space.
Yeah, I mean, I just think of your story you told earlier, right? It was your husband first God used to put the thought out there, even though the answer at first was like, that's ridiculous, which, that's part of my story on my journey to this, being a pastor is I said, that's ridiculous about 5 to 10 times probably in my life. But God kept sending people that said, hey, have you ever thought about this? Hey, have you ever thought about this? Hey, I think you'd be good at this. To the point where I had to be like, okay, fine, God. I get the picture.
So it just made me think of the question of what would you say to people who are worried, what if I miss what God is calling me to do? You're saying that he sent 10 people, and sometimes that's just because we need 10 people to recognize it. But, maybe there's somebody out there who's sitting there like, have I missed what God's calling me to do?
I mean, I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago too, just about trusting though, but in learning. And for me to get to that point of trust, it's for me was one of the hardest things to get to, where it was just like, hey, like, yes, whenever you tell me this is what it is, even if it doesn't feel like it at that point in time, because you are pulling me that direction, if it be through 5 people that come to you and say, hey, this is what it is, or if it be through what you're watching on TV and the name St. Paul's keeps going on. Like, that's part of Morgan's story, like before she got a job here, that it's like she heard the name St. Paul's in every piece of media, everything around her was saying St. Paul's. Like, I don't know if y'all came in our house and put it in there, whatever you did.
It's a plant.
Yeah.
And then that's fine. But I mean, but there are things that have happened that do that, and it kind of helps me to always keep in mind of the trust. But it is that he never does leave us. Like, God is always there, and to fix that deep down in your brain, where it's like, even those times that we do fail, or even those times that he's still there, he's still right there every time, every step, every breath. He is next to us, and he's trying to show us the way and trying to show us what we need to do. And when we fully surrender and just say, yeah, it is yours. I think for me is how I've always looked at that. 'Cause there are times that no matter where I've been, even if I've been there for 10 plus years, that I'm like, am I still at the right spot? Like, was this the right move from the get-go 10 years ago? Like, but to just go, no, you have me here for a purpose. You called me here for whatever it was, and maybe I just still haven't figured it out yet, but there is a reason why you have me in the place that you have me.
Yeah, I think that idea that God is a God of restoration, and the idea that, like, I can't answer that question of, did I miss out on some years maybe of doing, I mean, could that have brought a different path? Maybe, but our God is, even if that is true, our God is a God who can use even our mistakes and mess ups to grow us and to bring about his plan and purpose. That's what I love about looking at the story of Scripture. It's not a bunch of perfect people. And often God, if you look at the actual storyline, it's not what we would consider the best of the people, even that God always chooses to use as part of his plan and purpose. Sometimes it's the most messed up people. You're like, God, why the heck did you choose that guy? Like, why would you bring your plan and purpose through him? Well, that's because that's the kind of God we have, a God that's gracious, a God that shows his might and his difference from the ways of this world by choosing those who, to the world's eyes, are weakest and least worthy to bring about his plans and purposes. And so even if maybe you have made choices that have kept you from living in the beauty of what God created you for, he can still use that. And tomorrow's another day. And so the fact that you're asking that question is an opening for you to allow God to speak into that. And I think that's where then it comes to that place of awareness, right? Am I seeking for God to speak into that? And am I trying to be aware then of those? And if I'm asking that question, I think that's a place that is then an invitation for me to say, okay, God, what do you have for me? Is there something different I should be doing? Is there a different way I should be living?
Well, I think too, what you added in there which I think is the key to all of it, to do the trusting and the whole thing, is that spending time with him if it be in his word, if it be through prayer, like whatever it is, if you're not spending any time more than that hour a week, like you talked about, you're never going to necessarily feel like you're in the right spot. You're never going to know where you are because you're not listening. You're not trying to get in and figure out what the words are that he wanted to tell you because you haven't spent. And I say all this because I've been in those boats. I've done that time where it's, it's months that I haven't read my Bible. I've just went on living life. I mean, because I don't have time for it. I've got all these other things that I got to do. Instead of taking a moment, 2 minutes a day, 3 minutes a day, and just saying, hey, I'm going to spend this time with you, the creator of all things, to be like, hey, I got some time I can give you since, you're God and all. But to actually do that, like, it's a game changer in your life. So I feel like if you are in that boat at all, that you're like, I don't know if I'm in the right spot, I don't know, I would challenge you to, like you had said, to dig in and to find out, talk to him, ask him, keep digging, because the more you dig into his word, the more you dig into those times that you get to spend with him in prayer and just the silence, just the listening, but that your mind is focused on him, the more that those answers will become clearer and less blurred.
So I'm going to say that I don't have time. I'm a super busy person, and at the job that I was in prior to this, I had a 30-minute drive to and from work, and I would always say, I just don't have time. I don't have time. Until I figured out one day that if I turn on the radio and listen to Christian music, and while I'm driving my 30 minutes into work and my 30 minutes back home, I actually had an hour with God every day. Not that I wasn't paying attention to driving, but that was my time to listen to Christian music, and then there would be themes, and there would be words, and there would be sometimes a song where I'd go, boy, I really needed to hear those words today. So there are different ways of also putting God in your life every day than, if you don't have the time to do a devotion every morning because you've got 4 kids that you're trying to get off to school or something. Everybody's in the car at some point for something. Choose what you listen to, and maybe that's how God will reach you, is through music. Maybe he'll reach you through a good friend who is a Christian that wants to share something with you today. And I will encourage people, because this has happened to me over the last 3 or 4 years, that I obviously know that I've got friends and people that I know that are struggling with things. And there are times when God will put on my heart, you've just listened to this song, who needs to hear this, or you've just read this Bible verse, or you've just read this devotion, and who needs to hear this. And there are so many times at the beginning of this where I would go, gosh, they're going to think I'm weird, right? Or they're just going to go, why is she sending me this? This is really odd. And I took courage and went, nope, I really believe this is what you want me to do. And I would send people, here's the link to this song. I think you should listen to it. Or here's this devotion I read today. I cannot tell you how many times I would get a text back or somebody calling me going, I was thinking about you today. Right. And that just really helped me. I'm really struggling. So if you ever get that little nudge that says, so-and-so needs to hear this, please do it, because I have had so many times where he has made a difference in somebody else's life through me, and take that courage to reach out, because those little things about neighbors, right, and colleagues at work and stuff, this is how God does use us. We just have to listen and have the courage to follow through.
Amen. There's a pastor that Pastor Ray used to say, I used to pray this prayer, God, surprise me today. And I think that's the prayer of that kind of lifestyle, right? Lord, do something. Surprise me. Put the people in my way that need to be in my way. Put the song in my way that needs to be in my way. And so today, for you listening, that would be our prayer for you, is that, one, that God would surprise us today, but that God would surprise you today too. That he'd put the people in your way that he is intending to put in your way.
All right. Well, I think that closes out for episode 3. We are excited to talk with you all again next week. See you then.